I never imagined that buying a 150-year-old mountain house for just $5 would turn into a nightmare straight out of a horror comedy. The moment I stepped inside, the air smelled like old wood and forgotten stories, but the peace didn't last long. Within days, HOA Karen appeared, storming onto my property like she owned it, waving papers and shouting about community rules I'd never even heard of. I thought I was prepared for a fight, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The cops, the chaos, and her ultimate humiliation. Finding the mountain house felt like stumbling upon a hidden treasure. Nestled at the edge of an old forest trail, it had survived centuries, its walls warped with age, the windows fogged from decades of winter storms. When the auction ended and I realized I'd won it for just $5, I could hardly believe my luck. Neighbors whispered that the previous owners had abandoned it decades ago, and the local HOA rarely interfered with such isolated properties. At first, the tranquility was intoxicating. Morning fog rolled down the valley, the distant call of birds echoed through the pines, and I could almost imagine myself living a quiet, simple life. I started fixing the roof, patching the floors, and cleaning up the overgrown yard. It felt like reclaiming history. But no peace lasts forever, especially when there's an HOA with a Karen in charge. Karen had moved into the neighborhood 20 years ago and quickly became infamous for her obsession with rules, paperwork, and anyone she could control. She didn't like people who disrupted the order. I had a feeling she would notice me, but I assumed it would take weeks or months before she did. That assumption was wrong. On the third day of my renovation, a shrill voice cut through the mountain air. Karen stood at the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, glaring as if I had personally offended the laws of the universe. She claimed my land was technically community property, cited obscure clauses from some HOA charter that seemed made for a different century, and demanded I stop all activity immediately. I tried to reason with her, explaining the auction and legal documents, but she waved me off, declaring that no one had ever bought a house here without her approval. That was the beginning of the conflict I hadn't signed up for. At first, I tried the polite approach. Emails, phone calls, even certified letters outlining the legality of my purchase. Karen responded with more aggression. Daily visits, slamming papers on my porch, taking photos of my repairs as evidence of code violations. She seemed to delight in micromanaging every corner of the property, from the angle of my mailbox to the way I stacked firewood. Then came the fines, hundreds of dollars for things that didn't exist, like non-conforming landscaping or improper historical window treatment. I disputed each one, only to have them multiplied with additional fees, late penalties, and what she called administrative costs. Every interaction escalated. My quiet mountain escape was becoming a legal and emotional battlefield. Neighbors whispered that Karen had a history of targeting outsiders, people who dared to live in the mountains without her approval. She would use HOA rules as weapons, often bluffing legal threats to intimidate homeowners. But I refused to back down. I knew the house was mine. Each confrontation only strengthened my resolve. The tension peaked when Karen decided to physically enter the property. One morning, I saw her climbing over my fence with a camera in hand, shouting about trespassing and illegal occupancy. I called the local authorities, but she had prepared her own story, claiming she was inspecting community property. The officers seemed unsure, caught between HOA bureaucracy and common sense. Every day became a game of psychological chess, with Karen making increasingly bold moves and me having to anticipate her next attack. Meanwhile, the house itself seemed almost alive, creaking and groaning under the weight of its age and my presence. Every step upstairs, every hammer strike, felt like a countdown to the confrontation I could sense was coming. I began documenting everything: videos, photos, timestamps, preparing for the day her overreach would meet its inevitable consequence. The day of the final showdown arrived without warning. Karen appeared in the driveway, more furious than ever, waving a pile of documents and demanding I leave. I calmly locked the doors, filming everything as evidence, while explaining for the 100th time that the property belonged to me. Her voice escalated, her threats became personal, and she attempted to force her way inside. At that exact moment, the local sheriff arrived, responding to the calls I had made over the weeks. Karen's bluster faltered when confronted by the law. Officers examined the documents on both sides and quickly realized she had no legal claim. Her argument crumbled in front of the evidence I had painstakingly collected: auction receipts, deeds, and timestamps proving the house was rightfully mine. What happened next was almost cinematic. Karen S.'s face turned red with fury as the officers calmly cuffed her on suspicion of trespassing and harassment. She screamed about community rules as she was led away, while neighbors peeked through trees and windows, some stifling laughter, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The mountain air, which had been thick with tension for weeks, suddenly felt light and free. I stood on my porch, camera in hand, a mix of exhaustion and triumph washing over me. It was surreal. The petty rules, the intimidation, the relentless harassment, all of it had ended not with compromise, but with accountability. Karen's reputation in the neighborhood took a significant hit that day, a warning to anyone who thought they could wield power without scrutiny. After the dust settled, I finally had the peace I had dreamed of. The house, with its sagging roof and ancient wood, was mine to restore on my terms. I repaired the damage, stabilized the structure, and started documenting the history of the home for posterity. It wasn't just a victory over an unreasonable HOA member. It was a testament to persistence, preparation, and standing up for what's right. News of the incident spread through the local community, with neighbors recounting the tale of HOA Karen and the $5 mountain house. Some approached me for advice, others to share their own experiences with overreaching HOA rules. I realized that my story wasn't just about property. It was about boundaries, courage, and the absurdity of letting pettiness dictate lives. The experience left me with lasting lessons. I became hyper-aware of legal documentation, HOA bylaws, and the subtle ways power can be abused in communities. More importantly, I understood the value of patience and evidence. A single documented chain of truth can dismantle even the most aggressive attempts to control or intimidate. As I sit on the porch today, the wind rustling through the pines, I sometimes think about Karen, what she thought she could achieve and how quickly it unraveled. And I cannot help but ask, how many more homeowners out there face battles like this, forced to defend what's rightfully theirs against trivial yet destructive authority? The house is no longer just a building, it's a symbol that even the most absurd challenges can be overcome with preparation, courage, and a little bit of patience.